best podcast, the Heidelcast.
It's a Heidel Minicast. And now, Scott Clark.
After the death of Christ, does God still want a theocracy?
If the Heidelcast helps you, won't you help us keep it going? Please make the coffer clink by clicking on the PayPal link or by sending a check to Heidelberg Reformation Association, 1637 East Valley Parkway, number 391, Escondido, California, 92027.
And of course, you should subscribe to the Heidel blog at heidelblog.net/subscribe, and subscribe to the Heidelcast in any podcast app and give us a 5-star rating so that other people can find us. And we're at part 13 in our series on sub-Christian nationalism. You can see the whole series at heidelblog.net/Christian-nationalism.
The Heidelcast.
The theocratic impulse is truly ancient. All the pagan nations of the ancient Near East had state religions. The Israelites, the Egyptians, the Canaanites all had state religions, as did the Greeks and the Romans. The latter were particularly vicious in enforcing the state religion, revealing that the real Roman religion was never strictly adherence to the pantheon or even to Caesar as a god, but their real religion was conformity. The thing the pagan Romans hated most about the Christians wasn't their belief in Jesus as the Messiah. It was their refusal to conform outwardly to the Roman state religion and culture. And there really wasn't a big difference between the two. By saying the required words, Caesar Dominus est, or Caesar Dominus, Caesar is Lord, and by denouncing Jesus and by sealing that confession with a ritual offering or a sacrifice for their refusal to conform to the prevailing Greco-Roman cultus, worship, and culture. Tacitus, the ancient historian, called the Christians haters of humanity. Obviously, the Romans were offended by the Christian adherence to a Jewish rabbi who had been crucified. This, of course, naturally disgusted them. Anyone who had been crucified was, in their view, only worthy of scorn. They thought the idea of a god becoming man was ludicrous. Some of the critics mocked the reliability of Scripture in ways, frankly, that are not too different from the way that the higher critics would attack Scripture in the 18th and 19th centuries. But when they, for example, Pliny the Younger, examined the Christians, they found them to be good citizens, obedient to Roman laws, except for the law of religious conformity, and they were no threat to the empire. That was really pretty obvious. Justin Martyr promised, about AD 150, the Romans that the Christians obeyed the secular Roman laws better than the Romans themselves obeyed them. He invited the Romans to investigate the Christians and told the Romans to punish any Christian found guilty of breaking the secular laws. In fact, he said, "Leave the lawbreaker to us, and we will punish him more severely than you will." I've often wondered just what sort of discipline Justin had in mind, because the Romans could be absolutely brutal. In his speech or his treatise to the Roman pagan official Diognetus, about again AD 150, an anonymous Christian apologist wrote the following: "For Christians are not distinguished from the rest of humanity by country, language, or custom. The Christians were not like the Jews," he said, "who spoke an, quote, unusual dialect," close quote, and practiced an, again quoting, eccentric lifestyle. They lived rather, he said, cheek by jowl in both Greek and barbarian cities. And in that context, barbarian just means not Greek. And followed, again, he said, the local customs in dress and food and other aspects of life. What distinguished them, he said, was the, again quoting, unusual character of their lives, close quote. They shared everything, but not their wives. They participated, again, he said, in everything as citizens, but endured everything as foreigners. They were aliens in their own countries because every country was their fatherland and every fatherland is foreign. They were punished for their faith, but not for breaking the secular Roman laws. They were slandered and abused for no reason. They lived on earth, he said, but their citizenship is in heaven. The Christians obeyed the established laws. That's a quotation. And again, quoting, in their private lives they transcend, he said, quoting, the secular Roman laws. The Romans hate them, but their hatred is unreasonable. This is what the ill-informed call radical two kingdoms theology. The writer to Diognetus in AD 150, well, he just called it Christianity.
Call or text now 760-618-1563.
Justin Martyr, the writer to Diognetus, and others were asking the empire to be allowed to distinguish the sacred and the secular. According to Bernard Lewis, the Christians invented the idea of a secular state. I'm going to quote from Lewis extensively, about 2 paragraphs here, 3 paragraphs. Lewis wrote, secularism in the modern political meeting, the idea that religion and political authority, church and state, are different and can or should be separated, is, in a profound sense, Christian. Its origins may be traced in the teaching of Christ, confirmed by the experience of the first Christians. Its later development was shaped and, in a sense, imposed by the subsequent history of Christendom. The persecutions endured by the early church made it clear that a separation between the two was possible. The persecutions inflicted by later churches persuaded many Christians that such a separation was necessary. He continued to write, the older religions of mankind were all related to, were in a sense part of, authority, whether of the tribe, the city, or the king. The cult, and by that he just means religion, provided a visible symbol of a group identity and loyalty. The faith provided sanction for the ruler and his laws. Something of this pre-Christian function of religion survives or reappears in Christendom, where, from time to time, priests exercised temporal power and kings claimed divine right even over the church. But these were aberrations from the Christian norms, seen and reciprocally denounced as such by royal and clerical spokesmen. The authoritative Christian text on these matters is the famous passage in Matthew 22:21, in which Christ is quoted as saying, "Render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's." Commentators have often differed as to the precise meaning and intention of this phrase, but for most of Christian history it has been understood as authorizing the separate coexistence of two authorities, the one charged with matters of religion, the other with what we would nowadays call politics. In this, the practice of Christianity was in marked contrast with both its precursors and its competitors. In imperial Rome, Caesar was God, reasserting a doctrine that goes back to the god-kings of remote antiquity. Among the Jews, for whose belief Josephus coined the term theocracy, God was Caesar. For the Muslims, too, God was the supreme sovereign, and the caliph was his vicegerent, his shadow on earth. Close quote. Only in Christendom, he went on to write, did God and Caesar coexist in the state, albeit with considerable development, variety, and sometimes conflict in the relations between them. Well, that was Bernard Lewis. Christianity was legalized under Constantine, AD 313, but it did not become the state religion of the empire until AD 380 under Theodosius I. The 4th century marked a sea change. The apostles did not ask the Roman government to institute Christianity as the state religion. Implicitly, as Lewis notes, they asked for a secular state. Still, after 1,500 years of Christendom, it is a hard habit to break, and it is to that habit that the mostly Baptist authors of the statement want to return.
Ladies and gentlemen, Scott Clark.
The Idlecast.
In Article 14 of the Statement on Christian Nationalism, they call for not only the reimposition of the second table of the Ten Commandments, that is, Commandments 5 through 10, to be enforced by the magistrate, which should be uncontroversial, but they want the American civil government to enforce the first table too. Here the statement seems incoherent with itself, since, again, somewhat inconsistently, it provides two options regarding the first table of the moral law under Article 11, which I've already previously discussed with you. Under this article, they affirm that, quote, applying the core moral principle of each of the Ten Commandments, close quote, is, quoting again, general equity, close quote. Well, there's no question whether the law has a general equity. It does. That general equity, according to a range of 16th and 17th century writers, is what is known about civil justice from nature. They called it natural law. John Calvin, Martin Luther, Philip Melanchthon, et al. Equated the Ten Commandments to the natural law. As to general equity, Franciscus Unius, who died in 1602, wrote, quoting, moreover, the law of Moses is an example of the natural law, most suitably expressing the common notions of nature endowed by natural law. For the principles and conclusions of the natural law, that is, those common notions of nature, are perfectly expressed in the law of Moses. Those common notions not only exist in the corrupted nature of man, but also existed in the pure and original nature. The Scottish Reformed theologian Robert Rollock, who died in 1599, explained, but yet they will insist further and say, is this not one of the judicial laws that was given to the Jews? Then what have we to do with it? I answer, these laws, seeing the Jews and their commonwealth and their laws politic, are abrogate insofar as they concerned that people. We have nothing to do with them. They are abolished, but for as much as they are grounded upon nature and natural law, we have to do with them. As for this law, it is natural. You know that natural men, ethnics, who never had the law of the Jews, they executed the murderer. The Swiss Reformed theologian Amandus Paulinus, who died in 1610, echoed the Reformed consensus. He wrote, freedom from the laws of Moses is that by which Christians are loosed from the ceremonial and judicial laws of Moses, namely, so far forth as they only pertain to the civil government under Moses. And he cites a number of passages. For such laws belong to the law of nature, and by which all nations are bound, are not abrogated. William Perkins, who died in 1602, elaborates and thus gives us necessary background for understanding what the Westminster divines intended when they wrote the general equity thereof, close quote. That's the language from the Westminster Confession. Judicials, Perkins wrote, of common equity are such as are made according to the law or instinct of nature common to all men, and these, in respect of their substance, bind the conscience not only of the Jews, but also of the Gentiles. For they were not given to the Jews as they were Jews, that is, a people received into the covenant above all other nations, brought from Egypt, the land of Canaan, of whom the Messiah, according to the flesh, was to come, but they were given to them as they were mortal men, subject to the order and laws of nature, as other nations are. Again, judicial laws, so far as they have in them the general or common equity of the law of nature, are moral and therefore binding in conscience as the moral law. Finally, a passage from Johannes Walabius, who died in 1629, is helpful. He gives from his theological handbook 3 points. 1. As the ceremonial law was concerned with God, the political was concerned with the neighbor.
Call or text now, 760-618-1563.
2. In those matters on which it is in harmony with the moral law and with ordinary justice, it is binding upon us. 3. in those matters which were peculiar to that law and were prescribed for the promised land or the situation of the Jewish state, it has not more force for us than the laws of foreign commonwealths. James Ussher, Samuel Rutherford, George Gillespie, Johannes Piscator, James Dixon, Herman Witsius, and Thomas Boston all took the same position. General equity is code in Reformed theology for natural law. The theonomists and Reconstructionists, however, have typically ignored the Reformed approach to natural law and general equity and arbitrarily redefined general equity to mean whatever they say it means. This is very postmodern, but it is not accurate, nor is it the historic Reformed definition. Thus, even their invocation of general equity is confused. That God is triune is not known from nature, but that murder is immoral is. How can the magistrate impose the Trinity on a people, per the first, second, and third commandments, since it can't be known from nature? Yet the statement, at least in this article, asks the magistrate to impose the first table of the moral law.
Thanks for listening. Tune in tomorrow for more from the Heidelcast, brought to you by Heidelberg Reformation Association.org. Don't forget, when the coin in the coffer clinks, the cost of bandwidth shrinks. Copyright Heidelberg Reformation Association. All rights reserved. This is a Heidel Media production.
The best podcast, the Heidelcast.